Reconciliation is a big thing in Canada right now. We're trying to reconcile two worldviews, the Western worldview that comes from Canadian experience and history with the Indigenous worldviews that come from the land that we're currently resided on. And how do we reconcile and balance these two to foster good relationships and good community building? I'm going to go through some points that will be helpful for government and business that actually may help with this concept of reconciliation, going past the obvious things to building the values, the worldview actually into the company, which I think is the key thing for going forward. When you look at the Indigenous worldview, it's communal, it's cooperative, it's based on the concept of sharing. That was the original worldview that was here. We live in a society that's more individualistic and has competitive nature, competitive pieces in it. This is because of the economics and the system we kind of function in. But really, there are a few key things you can kind of point out that are actually kind of involving the Indigenous worldview, putting it into the company. When you look at sharing, for example, and you look at employment, well, employment in and of itself is an individualistic thing. I'm employed in said and said job. But if it's shared in a way with Indigenous people to kind of show them that investment and employment is an investment in yourself, then you'll see something about it that's unique. This investment in yourself is the same way when Indigenous people would hunt and they'd bring back something to the community and then they would share it. Well, the hunter or hunters took down the game. In this case, the individual is employed, is earning money, earning a salary, and they bring that home to their family to take care of them. But at the same time, this investment is actually helping a variety of people around them as well. This is where capitalism as a worldview meets communalism as a worldview, seeing that the two things, even though different, actually can be spoken in a way where they're actually working side by side. Some other things that may be focused on as well is teamwork. Community we're talking about. How do you build community in the workplace? Is community being built in the workplace? What's my responsibility to others? What's my job? Where does it fit in the hierarchy of jobs that we have? And how am I helping others in the whole value chain of the company or within the government? This is important stuff to know. Even though my job is individualistic, it's helpful for me to see it as a communal effort, as a team effort. This society generally has a huge focus on youth. But in the Indigenous communities, there's also a focus on eldership, knowledge. Prior to what we're seeing now, elders were actually the knowledge holders and would pass on this education to to the adults, to the teens, to children. And this was our educational system. So the focus also and the importance of elders is a key thing. But Indigenous ways of learning and ways of thinking actually look 7 generations ahead. It's not like we're not focused on youth. We are. There is an importance there. This concept of planning for that. There's also the concept within the Indigenous mindset of looking back and honoring the people that have gone before us and living our lives in an honorable, honest, and fair way to respect the lineage that we come from. If this stuff is focused, if this messaging can get across and can be put into policy and procedures, this is a helpful way to see how these worldviews work together. In the Indigenous community, it's more important to listen than it is to speak, although I'm speaking here. But it is more important to listen. And maybe the key thing within companies that can be kind of picked up is the concept that we know about from leadership training, active listening techniques. This concept, though, is understanding we need to empathize first, hear the whole context of the issue, and then speak to the issue. A lot of times with authority systems, they want to jump to the point and challenge that person or kind of take them through procedural justice or distributive justice of some sort. But if we start at the point of empathy, maybe we're going to find out not everybody fits into every single policy and procedure that we have, and that's practically impossible. And the rules are good, but the rules don't always work for everybody. And sometimes you have to accommodate on the basis of that. And you get there by listening. In Indigenous communities, it's more about patience. And when we talk about listening, that fits in there. The ultimate goal is harmony. We live in a society that can be a little bit aggressive, especially in the business world, and can be talking about conquest and these concepts and these ideas. They're not all horrible ideas, but how do you mend the two? I think it's important when we talk about patience, when we look at jobs, for example, It's not easy to learn a job. You don't pick it up on the first day you're in the office. It usually takes 4 to 6 months. There's a training curve. But maybe understanding as managers, that, patience is important. This is a value from Indigenous communities. And if we use it correctly, we can kind of meld these two and seeing that, here's a timeline for growth as you're going through, not being judgmental, but mentoring a person through the process so they get there, having realistic timelines. Authority systems in and of themselves have been problematic in many Indigenous communities and still are. So understanding that the way authority is used as well with confrontation, which is kind of aggressive, and going back towards listening will actually lead to better retention rates of Indigenous people. When we look at harmony and conquest, I think one of the big things that kind of pointed out is courage. Courage kind of falls under both. And when you look at courage, it's about balance. We're balancing worldviews here. One, courage is about standing up for what you know is just, what is right. And that'll put things back in harmony, peace. But you also know what you're doing is fighting to help others, not just yourself. There's a certain humility that goes with that. So even though we will have a concept of, which will seem like conquest when we look at courage, harmony doesn't have to be forgotten in the process either. We just looked at humility a little bit and pride, which is nothing wrong with. We come from communities where Indigenous communities are sharing as compared to saving. There's nothing wrong with any of these concepts, really. I think with humility and with pride, when you do take a look at it, what I think is important is understanding it's important to recognize people's work, to allow them to be proud of the work that they've done, but also to do it in a way that allows them to be humble at the same time. Again, if you have a public event at a government or a corporation, this person had won this award or has done this stuff this year. And let that person, be thankful also to their team. It wasn't just them alone. They worked in a whole company, in a whole value chain, understanding that it's okay to be proud, but it's also okay to be humble within the pride that you do have. Let people make mistakes. And that's a big one. Understanding, again, we talk about a learning curve, that there's some humility in that. And with mistakes, there's a learning process. You are not proud of mistakes, but they humble you. But they also make you better people because they're learning moments. And kind of building that into management systems. Sharing, again, was the Indigenous concept. That's where we started. And saving is kind of where we're at now in the society when we look at investment tools and money and saving for retirement, stuff of that nature. I think it's important to kind of point out that saving isn't a bad thing and kind of seeing it as an investment tool for the future. Again, we're planning for the future. We do look towards the future, 7 generations down. What can I leave? That concept is a saving concept, about saving things to pass onwards. That's not just values, but also the stuff that we have that can provide a better life for the people around us. I also think it's important, that you share, when it comes to sharing, that you share your time with those around you. Help them better themselves in the jobs they do and feel a sense of community in the businesses we are. Is there a communal type of mentality within the workplaces and the governments that we work in? Or is it always competitive? Each person looking out for their own job and not looking out for those around them as well. Are we building those types of communities within our workplaces? If you think about it, people will stay the more they feel valued. The Indigenous worldview is very inclusive. The concept is inclusive. The fact that we're talking today about 2 different worldviews and melding them together, you should speak to that in them itself. And this wholeness, this oneness idea that we see from the circle. As compared to fragmentation, which is the way a lot of companies are set up, and the way a lot of ideas are kind of set, that you could somehow remove physical from mental and mental from emotional, emotional from spiritual, and you name it. That these things can be fragmented into pieces. They cannot be. Each thing rolls into the next and affects each other. And I think that's important to know. But the big key thing there when you look at wholeness, fragmentation, is this concept of, which I kind of mentioned briefly, is understanding your role within the bigger picture. And I think that's an Indigenous worldview. My job may be here in the company, and there's 700 others that work here, and there's numerous departments at numerous different levels. But understanding that my piece fits here, 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 and it helps all of these people, and they help me. back in and back and forth this whole process goes. And as it works out, the customer, we help as well. Letting somebody see their place in the system so they can take some kind of pride, a little bit, some kind of humility in what they're doing and how they're helping others. All of these values are working together. When it comes to being inclusive, again, are we finding when it comes to ownership, that's a tricky one. Indigenous worldviews, there was no view of ownership at one point in time. So ownership in itself is an exclusive concept, but people need shelter, transportation, amenities. They need these things in order to survive in this modern society. If we're doing that with our employment, buying a home, buying a car, taking care of ourselves and those around us, realistically, that's not really selfish all in all. That ownership is actually helping me to help my family and to help my community as well. And even things like holiday, leisure, getting away from mental health breaks is, again, it's exclusive to some degree. It's about me, it's my mental health. But at the same time, my mental health affects others too. And understanding, yes, if I can look at these things this way from both ends of the spectrums here, I can see how these can be melded together within these companies and within the policies and procedures and values we use. So that's all I have today. But I think it's an interesting conversation to be having when we're looking at the future of where businesses and governments are going and how the Indigenous worldviews actually can enhance them and not hurt them at all. And if they could just see that as reconciliation, they're going to see the gift and the beauty within the Indigenous mindset.